on to another video. Cheers from my froggy mug. Did you know that you can go on Amazon and buy a library backdrop for your conference calls? Like just a piece of fabric so that you can look like you have a full bookshelves when you're calling your colleagues. This actually, all my videos, fake, not real. Fake bookshelf. Imagine if I just pushed it and it just fell over like one of those decor pieces in old Western videos. For only $12, you too can look like you read. I think this is very funny and just another very clear sign that we see reading and books as something intellectual. Books tend to be associated with knowledge, even though a lot of books that we read are fictional. As someone who likes to read a lot of books, clearly, I often notice that people tend to think you're really smart if you read a lot, even though you don't have to be smart to read, you just need to be literate. There's a whole aesthetic, dark academia, around the intellectual idea of being someone who goes to an Oxford University and reads books. I think we can all agree that reading is seen as this intellectual pursuit. And if there's one thing that historically people love doing with historical pursuits, is say that women can't be part of it. Women have always been kept from the realm of rationality, whether that is philosophy or writing or science. It would be too hard for the feeble female mind. I'm sorry, I cannot form a thought. I'm just a girl. People in the 20th century were so convinced that women didn't have the faculties to write that Virginia Woolf had to write a whole book about it, defending women's ability to write. And look at where she is now. Take that, imaginary 20th century man that told Virginia Woolf she couldn't do it. In 1996, the Women's Prize for Fiction was established because the previous year the Booker Prize had no female nominees. This is why I love having this community, my book channel on YouTube, which is mostly watched by women. I love how reading has become really popular among young women on the internet. The Booker Prize, which used to be dominated by men, is slowly but surely getting way more women on there too. With women making strides in literature and writing and also being super active in reading communities, online reading communities, we are finally becoming a big part of something that is deemed intellectual. Something as timelessly high status as reading. That's wonderful. However, this video is gonna be a pessimistic video. Lately, I was thinking, I was doing the devilish woman thing of using my brain cells. I know I shouldn't be doing that. And I found myself having an opinion, having a prediction about the future that is quite the doomer position. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining my thought process of that position. And then by the end of the video, I hope that you disagree with me and tell me that I'm being too negative. But I also hope you see where I'm coming from. So the position that I have, my prediction about the future is that as reading becomes increasingly associated with women and a girl's hobby, it will lose its status as something intellectual. To understand this, we must first talk about cheerleading. First, I want to tell you about me going out for my friend's bridal party. Cue kind of embarrassing photos of me. Every time I go to a loud place like that, I wear the sponsor of today's video, my Loop earplugs. Let me give you some Dutch advice here, okay? Every time you go to a festival or a concert or a loud place in the Netherlands, everyone is wearing hearing protection. It is important to protect your ears against loud music, and I wish everyone understood that. And with Loop earplugs, you can look cute while doing so. Loop has earplugs for any situation. My favorite is the Loop Experience Pro 2. It filters sound so you can still hear speech pitch and music, so it's perfect for concerts or just general noise sensitivity. And I also here have the Loop Engage too. It filters out annoying noises, but it is specifically made so you can still engage in conversation. So it is perfect for social gatherings. And Loop has earplugs for many more situations like sleeping or focusing or being able to switch between the styles. They come with adjustable ear tips, so you're sure that they will fit your ear. And they also come in many colors, so they can always fit your style. All of them are a perfect blend of fashion, quality, and comfort. Check out Loop for yourself by clicking the link in my description. When you think of cheerleading, you're probably thinking of girls, right? Doing super cool acrobatics work. I'm not American. I never grew up with like cheerleading at school, but I'm always very impressed by the way it looks in like TV shows. Anyway, did you know that cheerleading used to be a men's pastime? This was from the time before women were allowed at colleges. So cheerleading squads would just be men from other sports cheering on their fellow athletes. And it was considered really masculine because, you know, you are yelling, you are controlling a crowd, cheerleading. That was a masculine thing to do. But then the men, they went to war and the women had to come in and cheer. And this is when the stereotype of like the sexy cheerleader cheering on her man started to originate. And then when the men came back from war, you would think they would join the cheerleading squads again. You would think, well, you know, they used to do it before. Why don't they start doing it again now? Cheerleading could be this 50-50 gender split. But cheerleading had become so much associated with this like sexy cheerleader girl thing that some colleges even forbade men from joining cheerleader squads. Now it is fully a feminine thing. It is a girl's hobby. This phenomenon that the men completely leave the moment that something becomes associated with girls and women is called gender flight or male flight. It is the observation that women's jobs or hobbies are held under less esteem, and when a job becomes associated with women, men flock away to other fields. The men no longer want to associate themselves with it because it is now low status. It is now women's work. As far as I'm aware, this is not like a real sociological term, but it's more like an observation, and there are many more examples of this happening. For example, between the 1950s and the 2000s, working in recreation, so parks and camps, changed from being predominantly male to predominantly female. And with this change, the median hourly wage dropped with 57 percentage points. A similar thing happened when designers stopped being like a male thing and became a more female thing, where wages dropped with 34 percentage points, and biologists, where the wages dropped with 18 percentage points. Actually, let's take a closer look at STEM. As a woman with a STEM background, I studied neurobiology. I can tell you that, yeah, of course, STEM has always been associated with men, but things seem to be changing. According to Pew Research on women in STEM jobs, about half of all STEM bachelor degrees in 2017 were given to women. But the thing is, STEM is just not one study. It's many different studies. And it appears that there are specific studies that women tend to flock to, specifically life sciences and social sciences. I can give you an example. I studied neurobiology, and that's women. It's so many women. Life sciences. So women are getting into STEM, but the STEM fields that women are getting into, like biology and social sciences, tend to also be the fields that are seen as easier. They're not as prestigious as something like physics or engineering. But the point is that there are gender disparities within the STEM field, and they're actually getting more pronounced. Fields like life science, psychology, and social sciences, which started out with high female shares at the turn of the century, became even more proportionally represented by women at the undergraduate level. If we look at the number of men and women in psychology and biology here, you can see that over the last 20 years, the men are even slowly going away from them. And the important thing to also note is that these STEM fields where there are more women also tend to have lower pay. For example, men-heavy fields like computer science and engineering had a median salary of around 100,000 per year, whereas for female-heavy occupations like psychology, it was only 74,000 or 64,000 for biology, agricultural, and environmental scientists. And aside of these lower wages, life sciences and social sciences just don't really have the same intellectual status in our society as computer science or engineering do. Now, of course, many things could be at play here. Maybe women just tend to be drawn more towards STEM fields that are seen as a little less intimidating. Maybe they are drawn more to fields that already have a lot of women in there because there's a lot of sexism in STEM and these fields maybe make them feel safer. But the point is, although women are getting into STEM more, they are getting into specific fields which are seen as lower status, have lower pay grades, and are getting less and less men enrolling in them. Other examples of gender flight are nursing, which also used to be done only by men, mostly in military or religious services. But after it was feminized by the popularity of Florence Nightingale, it is now fully like a feminine job, so much so that when a man is a nurse, we tend to refer to him as a male nurse. It's also famously one of those jobs that is hugely important, but somehow vastly underpaid, similar to education. Primary school education, secondary school education is very much associated with women. The work is really hard and the pay is low, but the higher you get up on the education level, like going more into university, the pay rises and you also see more men there, more male teachers. This phenomenon where we value masculinity over femininity, where we value things men do over the things that women mostly do, is called androcentrism. And it's kind of at the heart of this male flight phenomenon. It even works the other way around. Did you know that computer science used to be female dominated? Now we tend to associate computer science with men and like billionaires. But it was actually women who programmed the first computers. Operating early computers was a task often given to white women. Before the 60s, programming and computing was doing pretty routine math exercises. So it was seen as this very routine mechanical job, and so women's work. Coders tended to be very low status and pretty invisible to society. But in the 60s, there was this growing demand for technology and computer work. So any professions having to do with computers rose in salary. And that attracted many male professionals. However, they didn't want to be associated with these lowly, invisible coders. So there needed to be a vibe shift. The status needed to be elevated. Computing historian Nathan Esmenger says that these new male computer scientists would claim that doing the computer science was to be a devotee of a dark art, a high priest, a sorcerer. It was to be privileged, elite, a master of one's own domain. Companies that used aptitude tests for their hiring process tended to favor not just mathematically inclined people, but specifically male candidates. Around the 70s, the stereotype that arose around like the computer nerd was the whiz kid, you know, the nerd, the socially awkward geek, all male stereotypes. If we look at the amount of women in computer science, we can see that it is especially one decade later in the 80s that women just massively started to drop off. One theory for this is because of the marketing of the personal computer. This new little piece of tech was mostly marketed towards boys as a toy for playing games. We started playing even more into the geeky, boyish nerd stereotypes. Computers were pushed towards boys. So if you did not grow up working with computers, for example, you're a girl and your parents just didn't buy you a computer because it was seen as a boy's toy, or if you were of lower income because computers were still quite expensive, you were already behind on your male peers that grew up playing around with computers. they already had a leg up when going into computer-related studies. So although computing used to be literal woman's work, it has now completely shifted the other way around. Like, it's not like it's 50-50. It is completely shifted the other way around, and now it is seen as a boys' club, a field that is high paying, held up in high regard. Once a field becomes feminized, the men tend to disappear completely instead of becoming a 50-50 thing. And the status and pay drops. Of course, there are many diverse factors that can contribute to this change, and they're not all the same for every different field, but there is a clear general pattern. Things women do lose their status, and then men don't want to be associated with these lower status or lower paying pastimes, so they disappear. When we push women into roles that are highly respected, we don't start valuing women more, we start devaluing the role that they now occupy. And this doesn't just go for jobs, it also goes for hobbies. We tend to really look down on things that are associated with women, like for example, boy bands. We just think of annoying screaming women, and these boy bands are not really respected for their music. Fan fiction, makeup, romantic comedies, crafting hobbies like knitting and crocheting, being into fashion, loving fashion, all things that general society tends to see as, you know, frivolous, cute, probably a little shallow, not real art, not real impressive, just girl hobbies, girl things. And I tried so hard to come up with one thing that we see specifically as a female thing that is also very highly respected and maybe like intellectual. Like for men, I could come up with many things like computer science, chess, philosophy, being a doctor, listening to Bob Dylan, kind of male associated things. But the only thing that I could come up with that is specifically associated with women and that we also highly respect was motherhood. And even then, being a mother is definitely not rewarded in our current society, let alone seen as like an intellectual pursuit. Imagine if childcare was expected to be done by men. Like, we would romanticize the hell out of it. I'm so certain it would be like, you know, fatherhood, it's just like you really have to be aware of all of these stages of childhood and you have to read so many books to understand what you're actually doing. There's actually so much planning involved with all the things that the children need to do, like going to their football practice and going to school. You need to be so in tune with what the child needs when it can't actually communicate with you. You actually need to be so intellectual to be a father, and like a female mind would not be fit for that. Anyway, the point of all this was to show that we tend to look down on things that women do, and the moment something becomes associated with women, and especially like girls, tends to kind of drop in status. And I think that's kind of the thesis of this video, that this may at some point happen to books. At the beginning of this video, we talked about how books have this like highly intellectual status, right? But it's also becoming more and more associated with women, and like young women specifically. I have many examples. The first main example is BookTok. BookTok is everywhere. Everyone is talking about BookTok. Even if you yourself don't like reading, you've probably seen videos of people talking about BookTok, like BookTok has lost the plot, BookTok has gone too far, can we even trust BookTok anymore? And let's be honest, if you take one scroll through the BookTok hashtag on TikTok, you can see that it's mostly just women on there, or men thirst trapping to summon women. And when we tend to talk about BookTok, like in general, I'm not talking about like niche people, I'm talking the broad strokes. It tends to be negative. Like either they're all reading bad books, they're like ruining reading, or these BookTok girlies, they're only reading smut.
He grabbed me by my waist, pulled me in close, and gave me a big kiss. And then we lived happily ever after. He me in my and grabbed my and whipped my I'm your
What book is that?
Oh, it's so cute. It's about these two fairies and they live in this magic wood and every night they on the table and at him and he and they
Book talk is ruining reading, romantasy is ruining fantasy books. Whether you agree with that or not is not the point of this video. I've made many videos already about book talk and like the discourse around book talk. That is not the point of this video. The point is that in the public consciousness, book talk is kind of looked down on. And I will say, little side note, I do notice how no one ever talks about the women, the many women that get millions of views on book talk that talk about like literature, that talk about poetry, that have really amazing in-depth things to say about the books that they are reading. But people don't really like talking about that. People tend to only focus on the women that aren't actually reading on book talk. Anyway, my point is, because people talk about book talk so much and book talk is mostly dominated by women, this may lead to us associating reading with women. Hello, Editing Leonie here. I want to make it extra clear that I'm talking about visibility specifically. I know book talk isn't an accurate representation of everyone in the reader community, but it's definitely the most talked about online and therefore the most visible to young people. So I think it's really shaping people's perception of reading as a hobby. I'm also not saying that young women are reading more than men. They are just the demographic that is most discussed online. So I think this is making women the most visible audience to people who don't read, and therefore shaping people's perception of what a reader looks like. Another example is the little trend of the gamer boyfriend and the reader girlfriend. There are so many like really cute TikToks that I do kind of love about like how every gamer boy needs his like reader girl, but it does kind of create this like gender split of like gaming for boys and then the girls, they're reading. Another example of how reading is becoming like this woman associated thing is like the jokes around men reading books to attract women. Some of it is just like jokes of like men reading Sally Rooney to woo the women.
Oh, is it showing? Oh, I hate when my feminist literature is sticking out of my back pocket. Guys, you need to check this one out. It's great. Thinking about me every night. Oh, is it that Sally Rooney?
But there are also like actual reading thirst traps on TikTok. But you never see trends of women reading books to attract men. So the reading in question here is seen as something that women like specifically. Okay, as I'm editing this, I'm aware that these are all like super online examples. So maybe that's just kind of my bubble. And I do think that maybe this idea of reading being a girl hobby is very much an online stereotype that is coming into existence. But the online world is where young people shape their ideas. So it may specifically be young people that are getting this idea that reading is like a girly hobby. Reading fiction is like something specifically for girls. And whatever young people think, of course, like has influence in like what happens in the future. And it's also especially young people that we're trying to get into reading more. So if young people get this idea that reading is just for girls, that is of course problematic, and I will talk about that later into the video. I also first have some more real life examples that are not just the internet. There's also articles everywhere lamenting like the lack of men in literature. Apparently in the UK, the number of men in the 20 young British novelists is going down. Like I said, the Booker Prize, which used to be dominated by men, is now seeing more and more women. This article claims that we have replaced our Kazuo Ishiguros and William Boyds with Sally Rooney and Elena Ferrantes. This piece at Dazed, titled "Where Have All the Young Male Novelists Gone?" talks about how apparently there are no like big household names in the UK anymore for young male artists or authors. It is either already established male authors, but the new and upcoming authors tend to be pretty much only women. Where, do these articles ask, have the young male novelists gone? Where is the young male reader? Is the gender flight already happening? Actually, we already know that men don't want to engage with books written by women. The Women's Prize for Fiction did research on people's book buying habits. They found that although women read both men and women, men tend to only buy books by other men. Buy books by men. Buy. 44% of the top 20 best-selling male writers are bought by women, whereas for female authors, it is fewer than 20% of the purchases that are made by men. I think we may be on the way to feminizing reading. Will reading soon just be a girl hobby? Will writing soon just be a woman's job? I think we may be on the way to feminizing reading. And given everything that we've talked about this video, my prediction is that this may lead to us devaluing reading losing its status as something intellectual or cool. And I'm not just making this video to be a doomer. There's a reason I think this is really important, because imagine what would happen if we started devaluing reading. Literacy rates are dwindling everywhere. Libraries and schools are trying everything to get young people to read for fun again. A population survey in the US found that in 2012, about 45% of people had read at least one novel or short story in the past year. By 2017, this was only 41.8%, and in 2022, it dropped to 37.6%. Also, I found out that this same research showed that over the past 20 years, men read less fiction than women, about 20 percentage points. So if we're just going by reading habits, data has shown that men read 20 percentage point less fiction than women do. Reading is vital for your language development, for your critical thinking skills, your reading comprehension. It's already really hard to get young people to read. And I'm afraid that if reading becomes a girl hobby, if writing becomes a woman's job, I'm afraid men are not gonna want to join in anymore because of the gender fight phenomenon, because we tend to devalue anything that women do. We've already seen that men tend to not want to read books if they're written by women. It's gonna be even harder to get them to read. And by the way, I'm not saying that women should stop reading or that we should stop the advancement of women in literature. Obviously not. It's just that we really need to solve this problem of where we devalue anything that women do. But what can we do about it? I don't know. Get your sons and your male best friends to read a book by a woman. Just in general, make people aware of our tendency to look down on things that women do. So the next time you see like a public outrage about something, ask yourself, does this really deserve this level of outrage? Or are people just piling on because we see women having fun with something? Ask yourself, am I taking this thing that the women in my life are doing for granted? Or should I maybe value it a little bit more? But what do you think? Am I just being too pessimistic? Maybe I'm just being a doomer. I mean, Pew research from 2021 does show that there are no alarming differences between the reading habits of men and women, because like 73% of men say they have read at least one novel in the past year, and 78% of women. That is not like a huge meaningful difference. Maybe there is no need for alarm. I do think it is important to note that this research was about books in general, so fiction and non-fiction together. Like I mentioned earlier, there is another study like this from the Survey of Public Participation in the Arts, which showed that men do read 20 percentage points less fiction than women. So maybe reading fiction will be seen as like a feminine thing? I don't know. Maybe reading isn't being associated with women at all. Maybe I'm just on the internet too much. Maybe we should be happy that we are finally associating something prestigious as reading with young women. Again, I hope that I'm wrong, but I would like to know your opinion. Do you think I'm onto something here? And I think most importantly, if I am, what should we do about it? And with that, I'm just gonna end this video with a shout out to all of my patrons and a special shout out to all of my elite patron members whose names you can see here. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I really hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon in another video very soon. Goodbye.